of you for coming out on this beautiful summer evening. I've spent the last hour basking in the sunshine and feeling as by garden, so I think I've got a bit of sunburn. It's great to be here this evening. This is a fantastic hall. Fiona told me earlier on that, I'm assuming this is true, so, that this was built with the original intention of hosting international badminton championships. So I used to play badminton when I was younger, so I was never at international level though. But the link to badminton is that I applied for lots of Commonwealth Games tickets, athletics and swimming and all the things that people want to go and see, and I got all the tickets for badminton. So badminton is my in sport at the moment. It's great to be here, and looking out at this audience, I'm struck, as I am at every meeting like this that I'm doing at the moment, and I'm doing a lot of them up and down the country in every corner of Scotland, but I'm struck every time I do a meeting like this at just the sheer number of people that are in this hall. Because no matter where I do these meetings, from the smallest village halls to the big school gym halls in the cities, they've all got one thing in common, and that is they are absolutely stowed out with people. People who are interested, engaged, who want to hear the arguments about independence, people who want to ask questions and have their questions answered. And it is to think that regardless of whether you're yes, no, or as many people are at the moment, undecided, there's something very, very special happening in our democracy right now. I've never known a time in all the years I've been in politics, which is more years now than I care to remember, when we've seen this level of engagement and interest, and when people have been quite as informed about the big issues of governance and government and where power lies and how powers can be exercised. So that's something I think we should be really, really proud of at the moment. We are engaged in something that is entirely peaceful and democratic. It's about what kind of country we want to live in and what the best way is of building that kind of country. So, as I say, whatever your point of view is on the outcome of the referendum, you should feel quite proud of the process that all of us are engaged in right now. What I want to do tonight, before we get into the question and answer session, and at this stage let me say, I'm here tonight primarily to answer your questions, and I will do that to the best of my ability. I will do it as straightforwardly and as honestly as I possibly can. What I want to say to you is, feel free to ask me anything you want. Within reason, obviously. But on the independence referendum, feel free to ask me anything you want. Sometimes people come up to me after these meetings and say, I had this question I really wanted to ask you, but I thought it was a bit trivial and people would think I was silly. Well, there is no such thing as a silly question in this debate. If it's something that you're worried about, that's in your mind, that you're concerned about, that's going to have an impact on how you vote on the 18th of September, then it's important. And if it's important to you, it's important to me that I get a chance to answer it. So please feel free to ask absolutely anything that you want. Before we get to that though, what I want to do this evening is make the case for Scotland being a normal, independent country. And I use the word normal deliberately, because as I've just been saying, we're engaged in a very special process right now. There's not many countries down the ages have had the opportunity to become independent through an entirely peaceful and democratic process. So the process we've engaged in is, relatively speaking, unusual in a good way. But it's not unusual at all for countries to become independent. You cast your mind back, or you will cast your mind back, because I can't see anybody in here that will remember as far back as I'm about to talk, or maybe one. But if you look back in the history books to the end of the Second World War, there was about 50 independent countries in the world at that time, around about 50 members of the United Nations. Today, there's around about 200 members of the United Nations. There's 200 independent countries in the world today. So over that period of time, round about 150 countries, many of them different to us in very, very different circumstances, have nevertheless made the journey to independence that we are now contemplating making. So becoming independent is not unusual, and being independent is certainly not unusual. That's the normal state of affairs for nations right across the globe. It's actually unusual for nations not to be independent. So that's what I mean when I say I'm going to make the case for Scotland becoming a normal, independent country. Now I'm going to make that case with reference to three of the general questions I get asked most often when I'm on my travels around the country or when I'm chatting doors in my own constituency. And these three questions are, firstly, can we really do this? Is Scotland big enough? Are we strong enough? Are we rich enough to be an independent country? And secondly, people will ask, okay, assuming they can convince me we can do it, we're big enough and strong enough and rich enough, tell me why we should do it. What are the benefits of being independent? What is it about being independent that will be better for Scotland than being governed as we are now from Westminster? And then thirdly, people will often ask, what if we don't vote yes? What are the implications for Scotland of a no vote, or staying as we are? So I'm going to, as briefly as possible, try to address these three questions for you this evening, and then we'll get into, I'm sure, a range of much more detailed questions in a little while. So firstly, can we do this? Now, that's an incredibly important question, and it's a very legitimate question for people to be asking, because I'm not going to be able to convince you that we should be independent if I can't convince you that it is economically viable for us to be independent. I'm going to try to do that in a second. But although that's a legitimate question and an important question, sometimes strikes me that it is still a bit of an odd question for a country with the reputation and the standing and the achievements that Scotland has still to be asking itself. You know, we think about the contribution that this country, this relatively small country, has made to the world down the generations. It can strike as a bit odd that we still doubt our own ability to be independent. I read a book a few years back. If you're into reading and you're looking for something to read, I would recommend it. It's a book by a Canadian guy called Arthur Herman, and the title of the book is How Scots Invented the Modern World. Also, if a Scot had written that book, it would sound really boastful and arrogant, but it's okay if somebody from outside Scotland wrote it. But you think about it, that's not a massive exaggeration. You know, the big innovations and inventions of our history, many of them originated here or by people of Scottish birth and descent. You know, from the television and the telephone to penicillin, tarmac, ultrasound, the overdraft, apparently we invented them. I'm sure we want to boast about that one as much as some of the other ones. More modern times, Dolly the sheep, one of the great scientific innovations of our lifetimes. Grand Theft Auto, a computer game that my 16-year-old nephew is obsessed with, that I've never played, but I know lots of people do, developed here in Scotland, in Edinburgh. So we've contributed so much, and yet we still have this doubt in our minds, can we be an independent country? Perhaps that's because we've listened to lots of people in the generations tell us we're too poor and too weak and not quite up to being an independent country, but nothing could be further from the truth. You know, Scotland's independent today. We would be the 14th richest country in the world in terms of the amount our economy produces by head of population divided by the number of people who live here. By that measurement, we are richer than Japan, than France, than the UK itself. The UK is number 18, which is not a bad position to be in, but an independent Scotland would be 4 places above that. And interestingly, when you look at the countries who sit above Scotland in that global league table of the world's wealthiest nations, the ones that are in the top 10, many of them are small countries. Countries with lots of similarities to Scotland, not least in terms of their size. So we're talking the Norways, the Denmarks, the Swedens of this world. They're the ones that sit in the top 10 richest countries in the world. So we are one of the world's wealthiest countries. Now sometimes when I say that to people, what I get in response is an but. And it goes something like this: but that's all about oil. And when the oil runs out, won't be a rich country anymore. Well, oil is hugely important to the Scottish economy. It's a big, big asset for Scotland. Incidentally, in terms of value, there's more oil to come out of the North Sea than has already been taken out of the North Sea. So yes, it's a finite resource, but it's not running out anytime soon. But oil is a bonus in our economy. It's a big asset, but it's not the be-all and end-all of the Scottish economy. I can talk to you about several other really strong components of our strong, diverse, varied economy. We've got a thriving food and drink industry, which earns about £13 billion a year. We've got a strong manufacturing industry. It could be stronger if we had the economic powers to grow it even further. There's a company in Falkirk manufactures buses that you'll find in many other countries across the world. We are world leader in life sciences. We've got renewable energy. You know, we talk about oil and gas. That's like winning the natural lottery, discovering North Sea oil and gas. Most countries are not lucky enough to win the natural lottery once. We won it twice because we've got renewable energy as well. That never ever runs out. So we're a rich country with a strong economy. We've got more top universities per head of population in Scotland than any other country in the world. So don't let anybody in this debate tell you that we can't be an independent country, that we're not rich enough to be an independent country, because believe me, nothing could be further from the truth. And don't let anybody tell you that Scotland is subsidised. Those on the other side of this debate tend not to use that word because they know it offends people to have it suggested that we're subsidised, but they say it in all but name. We're not subsidised. There's no money tree in London that sends up free money to Scotland. The services we enjoy in Scotland are paid for out of our pockets by the taxes and national insurance contributions that we contribute. Right now we send that money to London, and London decides how much we get back. With independence, we pay those taxes, we keep those taxes here, and we decide the priorities that they should be spent on. Now, an independent Scotland would be in deficit. The UK is in deficit, and most countries across the developed world are in deficit, and having control of our economic policy would allow us to take the things that get that deficit down. But we're not subsidised. You know, for every single one of the past 30 years, I think to be precise, it's every single one of the past 33 years, we've generated more tax per head of population than the UK as a whole. So that's our first argument to you tonight. If we choose to, we can more than afford to be independent. So however you decide to vote on the 18th of September, and I hope you all decided to vote yes, but if any of you, because it's an individual decision, you will all take your own decision for your own reasons, and that is absolutely fine. It's what you're entitled to do. But if any of you choose not to vote yes, I'm going to make a heartfelt plea to you right now. Please don't let it be because somebody has convinced you that Scotland is too poor to be independent, or we don't have the financial and economic muscle to stand on our own 2 feet. Because believe me, that could not be further from the truth. The second argument that I want to make to you tonight is why we should do it. My mother, when I was growing up, sometimes told me that because, or just because, you can do something, doesn't mean you should do it. Now, leave it to your imagination to think which way I'm talking about at the time, but the reason we should be independent, in a nutshell, is quite simple. Because it's better, whether it's Scotland or any other country, for the big decisions that determine how successful we are as a country, how prosperous we are, how fair our society is. It's better for those decisions to be taken by those who have the biggest stake in getting those decisions right. And that, in short, is all of us. Those of us who live in Scotland, who work in Scotland, who run businesses here, who raise children here. Nobody else, anywhere else, will ever do a better job running Scotland than we will. Now, that doesn't mean we'll always get decisions right. No country, no individual always gets things right. Nor does it mean we won't have our ups and downs as a country. Of course we will. All countries do. Independence is not a magic wand. We don't vote yes on the 18th of September and wake up on the 19th of September and all Scotland's problems have disappeared. That's not how it works. And if anybody on the yes side tries to tell you that is how it works, then they should be treated with the same disdain as the person who tells you we're too poor to be independent on the other side. So it's not a magic wand. What independence is putting into our hands the powers and the levers and the ability to take decisions to determine what kind of country we are. And we know from experience in Scotland that that works. We've got our own parliament already. We're halfway there already, you might say. Our own parliament looks after health and education. We take decisions on these big issues of policy already. And while the Scottish Parliament's not perfect, we will get things wrong as well as get things right, and we will not agree with every decision it makes. I don't agree with every decision it's made. But we are able to take decisions that better reflect the opinions and the values and the priorities of people in Scotland as a whole. Because we are already effectively independent when it comes to running our health service, we can say, and I say it with some pride, our health service is not being privatised the way the health service in England is currently being privatised. That's the advantage of taking your own decisions. So my argument is, if we can take our own decisions and demonstrate that it's better to take our own decisions on things like health, then why not also when it comes to deciding what economic policy we want, so that we can decide and design for ourselves an economic policy that suits our needs as a country, one that can choose the areas of our economy we want to grow and incentivise, using our economic levers to encourage more companies to invest here, to create jobs here, to allow ourselves to compete more with, and to compete more effectively with London and the South East of England. If we can take the big decisions on health and education, then why on earth don't we take the decisions that determine what kind of social security system we have? Right now, the welfare state as we know it is being dismantled before our very eyes by governments in Westminster. There's an estimate, it's not my estimate, it's a children's charity estimate, that says if we continue down the Westminster path on welfare policy that we're on right now, then by the year 2020 there will be 100,000 more children in Scotland living in poverty. That's appalling. And we've got a decision to make. Do we want to allow those decisions to be out of our hands and taken regardless of the consequences, or do we want to take responsibility ourselves? If we're independent, we get to decide how our resources are spent. Resources will always be finite. We will always have to make good, disciplined decisions about how we spend our resources. Money doesn't grow in trees, and it won't grow in trees in an independent Scotland any more than it does right now. But we can take different decisions about how we spend that money. Do we want to, as we will, if we vote no, have to watch £100 billion being spent over the next generation on neutralising nuclear weapons on the planet? There was a report published last week by some Westminster grandees recommending that triangle should be replaced. And in that report, the costs of doing that are laid bare. Now, put to one side the moral arguments around nuclear weapons. I've always been very against nuclear weapons, but put that argument to one side and let me just talk to you about the financial consequences. If triangle is renewed, then the annual average cost of that from the year 2016 to the year 2062 will be between £2 and £3 billion every year. And in 2020, when the construction of the new missile system is at its height, that annual payment will be £4 billion a year. Now our share of that is what, 300 million, 400 million pounds. I can think of lots of things that need that kind of money spent on them in Scotland that are far more socially useful than nuclear weapons on the Clyde. So these are not all of the reasons, they're just a few illustrative examples of the reasons why we should be independent, to give ourselves the ability to be the ones taking those decisions. And what happens if we don't? The third of my questions. Well, in short, you don't vote yes. These big decisions still get taken elsewhere. They get taken at Westminster, and sometimes they'll be taken by governments that we voted for. But very often, as is the case right now, they'll be taken by governments that we haven't voted for. I'm 2 weeks short of being, having a week now, I'm probably pushing it into the future, being 44 years old. Now, you might have to sharpen and take a breath that way. I'm almost 44 years old. Thank you. Every single, without exception, every single UK general election in Scotland in my lifetime has been won by Labour. Everyone. But for more than half of my life, we've had a Tory government. Now, that sounds like an anti-Tory point. And I am quite anti-Tory, but that's not, it's not an anti-Tory point, it's a pro-democracy point. We shouldn't have governments that we overwhelmingly reject. People in Scotland vote Tory, that's fine, we get Tory governments. But if we don't, we shouldn't. And with independence, we get the governments that people in Scotland vote for now. Not everybody votes the same way. There'll be people here who say, well, we'll get an SNP government in Edinburgh, but I didn't vote SNP. That's fair enough, that's a fair point, but the SNP won the election, we're the government. So it's the parties that win elections that should get to be the government, not the parties that lose elections. So if we vote no, we continue to get governments we don't vote for, and we can't guarantee it. I mean, Labour will say to you now, that some of the things I've been talking about more social justice and doing things differently, you just need to vote Labour in the next general election to get all of that. Well, I didn't see much of that when they were last in government, but put that to one side. The real flaw in that argument is that Labour can't guarantee that we will get a Labour government. Every single one of us in Scotland could vote Labour in the next general election, and the Tories can still end up in government because people in England vote Tory. So if we want to be able to guarantee who governs us and what policies we pursue, we need to be independent. So these are my three arguments. We can do this, we should do this, and unless we want to sit back for years to come watching decisions being taken elsewhere that we often don't agree with, we must do this. These are all, I suppose, though, arguments of the head. And I make no apology for that. My support for Scotland being an independent country is one that's very much driven by the head. I think it is utterly rational and logical and reasonable. But I'd say to you, as my final remark, don't forget what you feel in your heart about this either. At the end of the day, on the 18th of September, when all of us make that trip to the polling station, and we're all equal, all of us that day, from the richest person in the country to the poorest person in the country, we've all got one vote, we all hold the future of this country in our hands. We'll know on the 19th of September whether we've kept control of it or given it straight back again. But think about how you feel that day. Because when all of the questions have been asked, and when they've been answered in the best way that questions can be answered, to the best extent that any questions can ever be answered, this will come down to a decision and a judgment about whether you've got confidence in the people of this country to build the future of this country. That we are the best people to do that. Whether you've got confidence in us as a country to run this country in the best possible way. If you're sitting there just now, here just now, and you're thinking Scotland's as good as it can be, nothing in Scotland can get any better, then by all means vote to keep things as they have. But if you think, like I do, that we're a great country, we're a fantastic country, but you know what, we could be better. We could tackle poverty, we could have a better economy, then it comes down to, do you think we are better able to do that and achieve that than Westminster is? And think about how you feel on the 19th of September when you turn on your television in the morning if you've got to bed and you're turning on the telly to find out the result. Apart from the fact that David Cameron's smug face smiling out of the office, nobody would want that. But think about what is going to make you feel more confident, more optimistic about the future of this country. Is it knowing that we had this massive opportunity to say we can do things better, we can put ourselves in the driving seat of our destiny, and we've got within touching distance of that and said, well, the eyes of the world on us, and we've said, nah, we'll just leave things as they are. Or is it knowing that we've, perhaps, with feelings of nervousness, think about every big decision you take and have taken in your lives. Leaving home, getting married, moving house, changing job. There's always a part of you thinking, am I doing the right thing here? But you do it because you know that deep down inside it's the right thing to do for you, for the progress of your life. And you know that if you don't do it, you'll forever and a day regret it. Do we want to feel that feeling of regret, or do we want to know that we've perhaps been nervous, perhaps been apprehensive, that we've seen the prize and we've grasped it? We might not get this opportunity again. For goodness sake, let's grasp it with both hands. Thank you very much.
From your reaction as you did it, you also do. Can I just, before we go to question answers, can I say to the folk that have come in at the back that there's 4 seats down the front, and there's another 2 here, another 2 there. There are seats, 4 want to come and get a seat, or if you're quite comfortable sitting on mats, but please, there's seats down the front and various ways of time that you want to seat. How are we doing this with microphones? Right. Open the floor to questions, and we have a microphone and a stand over here so that if folk can't hear and they come and use the microphone over here. Okay. So how about if you put your hands up and then right and you come for a cue? Because I usually do through my baby like that.
Just showing some of the questions. Be careful. Don't break it. Just you move the camera out a wee
Do you need to use the microphone? Can't do
the zoom's just.
Nicola, this is a very personalised question to my family. I'm aware of the SNP's promise to the BBC after it would be taken on the original Scottish Broadcasting Service. However, this, as you probably see, I'm back of the yes, But my mother is quite worried because she's in the BBC in Scotland and she works specifically in the orchestra. Now she's worried there's not going to be the interest of funding, because most of that interest in funding does come from London as far as I'm aware. Would a Scottish BBC orchestra be protected within a Scottish broadcasting service? She probably lose her pension and wages because she retires as well.
What countries will see the situation in Nicola Sturgeon?
The club nomination naturally SNP support every private army we support. The reason why I support it is because you see the old party countries getting right in industrial policy. Shakar Vodka.
That's
actually not the case. But what I want to know is, right, managing people on safety, we can find a couple of managing directors, we find that. So what I want to know is, right, would you agree with me that the only way that we actually can expand engineering, shipbuilding in Scotland is actually the levers of our own economy? And what would you do as a government? Because this is there's an end of that's never spoken anymore. We need some nationalisation and some state intervention in order to private parts of our industry so that we can become a manufacturer. To compete with South Korea or Taiwan. I know we have to go to the German level and actually for high-end manufacture, but we need to do that, and I hope that you have an answer for that.
Just before David comes in the next debate, while Nicola is going to answer. So, we go to 1, 2,
Today I was talking to a tradesman and I was going to the young people and I was going to we're going to defend one from the way they come up. University isn't for everyone to go, certainly I think university, that's my year of work. I get 2 O-levels in my state secretary of the police force. We've gone to science, brains. It's not just tradesmen today, and all that. Medicine, apprenticeships, apprenticeships on. And said that there's 8 emails every week from young folk trying to get apprenticeships through. And he says, you can't take them on. The way his work is just now, you can't afford to pay them. You can't afford to put them through college courses, whatever it is, university. Globally, craft apprenticeship. And there's a lot of young kids that are there from it. It's independent, fully help that, the best, the get money to jobs, help young folk get apprenticeships. Through the work of the government, once there are many, one of the older health systems, they're all out there, we just need some help to get these kids into the full time apprenticeship.
Sorry, the guy who asked the BBC didn't catch your name, Gordon. You, obviously, from the we asked the question, you've read the proposals in the white paper in the BBC in terms of our proposal to establish a Scottish broadcasting service based on the assets of the BBC in Scotland, with share and negotiated share of the other end of the BBC, but to operate a joint venture with the BBC in terms of shared services, etc. So, absolutely, in terms of things like the orchestra, which are hugely valued, we would. I'll tell you what, you can film anything you like. But what I can do afterwards, if you want, rather than film half an answer, afterwards I can give you a wee video clip of the answer to take to your mum. Okay? Alright. See, if I just do this for everybody across the country, this would be dead easy. So yes, of course we would take steps, in Scotland, working with the wider BBC if that was appropriate to protect the things. Some of the sillier things we've heard in this debate, and all that incidentally, but things like if we vote for independence, we won't get to watch Doctor Who. That was a scare story that seriously was in the papers the day before the anniversary edition of Doctor Who aired in 71 countries or something across the world. So, we thought that we contributed to UK assets like the BBC. We're not talking here just with the BBC, we will share of those assets, and we will choose to cooperate in many respects in terms of how we go forward in some of these things. But I look forward to speaking directly to your mum. I said, what does she play in the orchestra? Well, I don't have a musical bone in my body, so all people who play musical instruments. Shipbuilding, we've talked about this before, that shipbuilding is something very close to my heart, and I used to represent government shipyards in Parliament before the Boundary Commission did its work and robbed me of the shipyards in my constituency. Some of what we're hearing about shipbuilding deserves to be exposed as the mythology it is. We were hearing yesterday or the day before that the frigates won't be built in independent Scotland because the UK won't build ships in a foreign country. Except that 2 days earlier, Philip Hammond, the Defence Secretary, when asked this question about the next aircraft carrier, said, oh yeah, we will build that in Rosyth because that deal's already done. So they will be building, I don't think Scotland and England will ever be foreign countries to each other anyway, but put that to one side. Complex aircraft are built in terms of international consortiums. The Typhoon, the Joint Strike Fighter, these are conglomerates of different countries where bits of them are built in different countries. So, let's just be mindful of what happens in the real world where we're hearing some of the things put forward by the No campaign. The Clyde will continue to build the Type 26 frigates because the Clyde is the best place to do it. I don't need to tell you this. The best facilities, the best workforce, the best skills, the best record in terms of these contracts. And that's why the Clyde will be where those ships are built. To do it anywhere else would incur massive, unnecessary and additional costs that, believe me, the MOD won't want to incur. So let's have a bit of common sense about some of this. Your question is about looking a wider future for shipbuilding in particular and manufacturing in general. I said earlier on, well, not that point, I'd like to talk about shipbuilding. Shipbuilding, if we want to secure a future for our remaining shipyards, and incidentally, as part of the UK government, governed by Westminster, we're soon going to only have one shipyard on the Clyde, because they're planning to shut Govan. So don't let anybody on the other side of this campaign tell you that independence shuts shipyards. They are shutting shipyards. If we want to secure a future for our shipbuilding industry, not just for the next 10, 20, 30 years, but for the next 40, 50, 100 years, then we need to think not just about the military procurement, we need to think about diversifying what we do. If you look at Norway, Norway's got, I can't remember the exact figure, but Norway's got many shipyards. They're smaller than our Clyde shipyards. They build oil supply vessels, fishery protection vessels. I think the last year the figures are available, they've got about 70 ships or something in that 1 year. I'm not saying that model is absolutely the one that Scotland should follow, but we need to think about how we diversify beyond just military shipbuilding. The point about manufacturing in general, we've got a good manufacturing industry, but it could be a lot better. Manufacturing has declined across Europe, but it's declined much more sharply in Scotland. I don't think, we don't shy away from public ownership where we think that is best. I've got a breath in my body, will defend public ownership of public services like the health service. We've said we want to bring Royal Mail back into public ownership because it never ever should have been privatised. But I'm not going to stand here and tell you that we are in favour of nationalising huge swathes of industry. We're not, but we are in favour of being very serious and focused and targeted about how we use our economic powers to incentivise growth in areas like manufacturing. Other countries do it. Other countries, similar in size to Scotland, do it, and we need the levers and the ability to do that as well. And you get more jobs in manufacturing. You also get higher paid jobs. The average manufacturing job pays about £600 a year more than the average job in the wider economy. So let's get our hands on some of these levers so that we can start to do these things and start to grow our manufacturing base again. My final point to you is how you started your question, that you're not a natural SNP voter, your inclination would be Labour. I'm sure there are Labour voters or people who used to be Labour voters in this hall right now. I'm going to say something that I believe very strongly. It's not necessarily in the interest of the SNP. But I think independence for Scotland will be the best thing that ever happens to the Scottish Labour Party. Because they'll be able to be the Scottish Labour Party again. You don't have to look over their shoulder to get their instructions from Ed Miliband or whoever, Gordon Brown as he was when he was Prime Minister, or Tony Blair. They'll be able to decide what's right for Scotland, what is in line with their principles and values. And that might not be good for the SNP, that might make more competition for the SNP great. If that helps and strengthens Scottish democracy, I think that's a good thing. So if you're a Labour voter wondering how to vote, there's another reason to vote yes. And the best thing that's happened to your own party in a long, long time. Third question, Robert. See, I got your name right, I don't know where you are, but I got your name right. On modern apprenticeships, we are already responsible as the Scottish Government for modern apprenticeships. We've actually got record numbers of modern apprenticeships in Scotland right now. As you probably know, we're the only country in Europe that has a dedicated Minister for Youth Employment and focused very much on trying to crack the nut that is youth unemployment. So there's many opportunities for apprentices and for apprenticeships. I don't, was that a friend you said you've been talking to? If you want to pass on the details, because there's also schemes that, because some companies find it difficult to support apprentices, I think you were saying your friend's position is, but there's government help. We've had schemes like Share an Apprentice, where we help two different companies come together and jointly employ an apprentice and share the cost of that. So if your friend is interested and wants to get in touch, we can make sure it's pointed in the direction of all the help that is available to companies to take on apprentices, and we're very keen to encourage companies to do that. Where independence, I think, will make a difference, not overnight, but over time in terms of opportunities, is very similar to what I've just been talking about. If we've got control over our economy and our economic levers, we get more ability to implement policies that are about growing the economy and creating more opportunities. One of the policies we propose, which Labour always says they disagree with, even though Gordon Brown did it himself when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, is cutting corporation tax. Not to give big companies a tax break, but to encourage more companies to set up in Scotland, to have their headquarters operations in Scotland so that they can create more opportunities for our young people. You're right now, every year in Scotland, between 30 and 40,000 young people leave. Now, young people will always want to leave and travel the world, and that's great. But not all of these people are leaving because they want to. Many are leaving because they can't find the opportunities here, they can't find the career progression opportunities here, and that's got to be one of the big incentives of being independent and in charge of our economies. We can start to do something about that. And that, if I was somebody that had a family member living outside of Scotland simply because they can't find a job in Scotland, and I want to see them do something about that.
My question is about the currency. If I read correctly, if we keep the pound, we have to cede some of our sovereignty to the Bank of England. The other question I have about the currency is, if we're still part of the European Union, do we take the euro?
Hi, Nicola. I work with us in Scotland, in St Hampshire, and I think housing organisation is part of the financial strategy that's seen as the end of the world, basically. And that's why we're having the NHS and Europe are bringing their conference to our wonderful country in October this year because they've recognised the work we're doing. And what I'd like to know is, we created a wonderful expectation for people affected by illness in this country. And then in Scotland, with that expectation be carried forward and we built on.
I just want to make a quick comment about the National Health Service discussed around health. I think the problems that are faced by the National Health Service community will be the same in Scotland, and it would be no surprise that some of those solutions are the same. My friend's mother, who had an operation a couple of weeks ago, she comes in for time. She had that operation done nothing under the NHS. So I think we have to be realistic about, that our solutions are not going to be hugely different to the same problems that we're facing. I think we have to be honest with ourselves about that. My two questions centre on Europe, predicated on the fact that possibly the next big referendum we're going to have. If we presumably feel that the following currency or options, financial options, currency options would be available, and we could choose one of these products. If you have the option to join the euro, continue to use sterling, have our own currency, or operate some conscious currency that we can for the dollars, which option would you choose? If those are the options available to you. And the second question is, presuming that we are able to either remain in Europe or become a member of Europe, would you be able to stop in the referendum for in out or out to live or not actually in this time? Thank you.
These are quite chunky questions, so my apologies for deliberately taking a little bit of time to answer them and give them the detail that they merit. On currency, and the first and third questions were about currency, so I will partially answer your question. We'll come back to some of the European aspects of your question at the end. We're not going to go into the euro. No country can be forced into the euro. Sweden is a good example of a country that has joined the European Union after the kind of requirement to join the euro was built into the European treaties. It's not in the euro, it doesn't have any intentions of going into the euro. Some of the prerequisites of being in the euro are voluntary steps that countries have to take. For example, you have to be a member of the European exchange rate mechanism for 2 years. And that's a voluntary thing, no country can be forced. So, an independent Scotland, for a whole variety of reasons, wouldn't even qualify to be in the euro when we became independent, and we can't be forced into the euro. So don't let anybody tell you that that would be a requirement of us being continuing members of the European Union. We propose that we will keep the pound and we will use sterling. When George Osborne and his pals say you can't use sterling, you can't use the pound, I think whatever you feel with the referendum, whether you're yes or no, that should probably make you quite angry. Because it's our pound as much as it is George Osborne's pound. And we contributed to and built up that currency as much as anybody else in any other part of the UK. And the reality is, nobody can stop Scotland, or for that matter any other country, from using the pound if it wants to. The pound is in economic parlance what's called a fully tradable international currency. What that means in everybody else's language is anybody can use the pound, and there's nothing that George Osborne or his pals can do about it. When Ireland became independent from Britain, guess what? It used the pound until it then opted to have its own currency. Of course, subsequently Ireland went into the euro. When Australia became independent from Britain, guess what? It used the pound until it opted to have its own currency. So, this idea that George Osborne gets to decide who uses the pound and who doesn't is just complete and utter nonsense. Our proposal, of course, is to use the pound as part of a formal currency union with the rest of the UK. We asked a fiscal commission made up of economic experts to look at all of the different options that an independent Scotland would have for its currency. You can, if you're interested and have the time, you can go onto the Scottish Government website and read that report. It goes through all of the options. It's called Proposals for the Macroeconomic Framework of Scotland. And it goes through all the options, and it goes through the ups and downs, the pros and cons of those options, and it recommends use of sterling within a currency union. And it recommends that because that would be, in its view, we accept this in the best interest of Scotland, because of our trading relationship with England. But it also says that would be in the best interest of other parts of the UK as well. Because while Scotland trades a lot with England, England trades a lot with Scotland. If businesses in England were forced to use a separate currency to Scotland, then the additional costs they would incur, at a conservative estimate, are about £500 million a year. It's going to be a brave Chancellor that turns around to their own businesses and says, if you want to export into Scotland, you're going to have to pay £500 million more a year. It's also the case that if we're in a formal currency union, our exports, which I think in total are about £100 billion a year, they still count towards the UK's balance of payments. If that's not the case, the UK's, or the rest of the UK's trade deficit is going to take a wee hike north and go through the roof, and that will have an impact on the value of sterling. So there's lots of reasons why it makes sense, not just for Scotland, but for the rest of the UK. And so, when you hear politicians now saying, no, that's not going to happen, we're not going to let that happen, just think about UK minister you might have read about in the Guardian newspaper, who said to the Guardian journalist, that's all campaign rhetoric, after the yes vote, of course we will be a currency union. So, just remember, people will say things in a campaign, the reality will be very different once they're faced with that reality. So that's the position on currency. I think it's a reasonable position, I think it's the right position, and all of you, voters, have to make up your mind whether you think that is the sensible position for us to take. Next question on Alzheimer's. Would they ask the person on Alzheimer's? We are, sorry. I'd just like to see the person asked the question. I'm very familiar with the dementia strategy. I was health secretary when that strategy was developed. Again, I did lots of very important things when I was health secretary, and there's much of that job that stays in your heart forever. But the work we are doing in Scotland around dementia is, if you rightly say, world leading. And I'm very proud of it. I think we should all be proud of it. Around diagnosis and support, dedicated support for people with dementia. A lot of work still to do, but we're definitely on the right track, and we work for an absolutely first-class organisation, without whom none of what we do in that area would be possible. So yes, if we're independent, these are all decisions of the Scottish Government already. We're independent, that doesn't change, it will continue to be our decisions, and we can build on these things. If I was to draw any kind of relationship between the referendum and health, because health is pretty much all devolved already, it would be around how we're funded in Scotland. And I'll address your point about privatisation in a second. I think you make a reasonable point there, but put aside whether you think privatisation of the health service is a good thing or a bad thing. If that continues in England, and the current government would deny this, but the inevitable logic of that is that over time, public money in the health service gets replaced with private money. And that's a direct implication for Scotland's budget, which is decided through the Barnett formula. Our budget is decided by increases or decreases in public spending in England. So if public spending in the health service is declining because more private money is coming in, then that will mean we get less money through the Barnett formula. And that has a knock-on implication for our devolved services. So better to be in charge of our own resources so that we can continue to protect and build on some of the good work that we're doing on areas like dementia that we talk about. Good point. you know, as I've referenced a couple of times now, I spent 5 years as Health Secretary, and I would never stand on any platform anywhere in Scotland and say that our health service is perfect, because it's not. I think an organisation of the size and complexity of the health service will always have things that need to be improved and things that have potential to go wrong. So we should never, ever, ever think that we've got it sussed in the health service and we don't improve it. We absolutely do. And what we do, you talked about, I think you said your mother did an operation, a friend's mother. We, around the margins, if a hospital needs extra capacity in the short term, then we'll buy that capacity in hospitals out nothing. That's marginal in the health service, and that's not what's happening in England. What's happening in England is that whole swathes of the National Health Service are being sold off to the private sector so that they run the health service. I mean, last week, I don't know if any of you heard this in the news, cancer care services are being privatised in England. And that's not the health service using private capacity when it needs it, that's handing over all of the health service capacity to the private sector, allowing them to run it for profit. And I don't think, whatever imperfections or need for improvement we have in our health service, I think we'll go down that road at our peril. 5, 10 years from now. England will have a national health service that is recognisable as a national health service. So it will still be called the NHS in name, but that would be a brand name. What lies behind that would be very, very different. And I don't want that to happen in Scotland. And I speak in saying that as somebody who, like all of us, cares passionately about the health service. And I just think it would be a disaster to go down that road. I've got a bit of a tangent on my I Can Talk for Scotland when it comes to the health service. The rest of your question was on Europe. We'll be a continuing member of the European Union. I have no doubt about that. We vote yes in September. If we vote yes in September, there is an 18-month period before we become independent. There is a process we will have to go through to make the transition from being a member of the EU as part of the UK to being an independent member. We've identified the treaty provision that could facilitate that transition. If anybody is interested enough, it's Article 48 of the European Union Treaty. Interesting, there's no provision anywhere in the European Union treaties that would allow part of the territory of the European Union to be put outside because we voted for our independence. And you think about this, the European Union is an organisation that from the moment it was set up has been about expansion. And it's also founded on the principles of democracy. I mean, always practiced them particularly well, but it's founded on the principles of democracy. So this expansionary, democratically based organisation is going to turn around to part of its territory and say, no, we want to reduce ourselves, we want to get rid of you because you've exercised a democratic right to self-determination. There would be a crisis in Europe if that was to happen. And that's before you get to the very hard facts that we're Europe's biggest oil producer. We've got the biggest share of Europe's fishing waters. There's 160,000 people from other European countries who live in Scotland right now. If we were outside the European Union, they would suddenly, overnight, lose the right to live here. It would be chaos for other countries, not just bad for Scotland. So, you know, we will be a continuing member of the European Union. The biggest threat to our membership is the other referendum that you talked about, where if we don't vote yes, we're still part of the Westminster system. In 2017, we could have a referendum where across the UK, I'm not saying this definitely will happen, nobody knows at this stage, but it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think that it might happen. The UK as a whole votes to come out, Scotland votes to stay in, and we end up being taken out against our will. I don't think we should take that risk. That would be disastrous for the Scottish economy. We don't favour a referendum on Scotland's membership because we're not proposing a change. We're proposing that Scotland continues to be a member of the European Union. The thing about being independent is that these things become matters of democracy. I'm not saying you do, I know your view, but if anybody here feels really, really strongly that there should be a Scottish in-out referendum, then they can vote for a party in the 2016 Scottish election that's proposing an in-out referendum. It won't be the SNP, but I think the Tories have already said they will be, so that's democracy. And if people feel strongly enough about that, enough people will vote, as I suspect will actually be the case, and that's not the case, then they vote. And that's how decisions are taken in normal democracies, and that's how decisions will be taken here as well.
I think that's a polite way of saying you maybe answer. Please ask me.
Good evening. First of all, sorry I can't answer. My opinion of Westminster is it's an unholy alliance of rich lobbyists, media locals, and MPs who conduct a completely undemocratic voting process of government. Now, I would like to feel that change, but what I would want is to substitute Westminster for the system in Edinburgh. My big issue is land reform. I walk all over Scotland, and 300 people on behalf of Scotland's landmass. And I don't believe Westminster will ever be able to do that. And on the 19th of February, whatever the results announced, I firmly believe that some of these rich landowners, whether through old time newspaper, these people will be knocking on Mr. Salmon's door and your door, trying to say whether an influence over Scottish government as it is over Westminster. Now, I am undecided, but if I have to give some reassurance that things will change and become a more democratic country, one example is that my party here, Nicola Sturgeon, for the Western Europe, doesn't come to the power in Germany is all difficult. So that's really excellent. Question out of this. But if that's why I need to go, yes, some reassurance for what they have done.
My concern about it is that community management has been and my concern is resolve the civic how civic values and what it must be by
Hi, Nicola Charlotte. I want to ask a question for different things, two things. One is on the issue of women. Talk quite frequently about it. It's really women who are decided, either because they've got too much information coming up, or it depends who chooses it. And that this is a great reservoir of potential support for independence and each of office meetings each court. Say that, we have to say. And the public sector, as the public sector worker, I'm a teacher. Most public sector workers are women. Most public sector workers earn considerably less than teachers. In fact, the increase in poverty is among the working poor. People who have jobs who don't get paid enough to look after their families with financial scams or vaccinations. Now, as a public sector worker in the whole Britain, we've had real pay cuts over the last 4 years. We are the people paying for austerity. As the rich public sector is proportionally quite large in Scotland. Now, tomorrow, there's a huge public sector strike that will take place in England and Wales because many workers in that position have said, enough's enough. I'm sorry, our living standards are going down. And then if you look at it in the newspapers, you look at the telly all the time, you've never seen the end of the millionaires and billionaires and Tony Willis and the rest of it. Now, I think that we have a chance to stop that with independence. Obviously, if we do get independence, we still have an election for the Scottish Parliament, and as you know, I don't think anything will ever be the same regardless of what the economic vote is. But I think that if we made some sort of commitment to the public sector worker, that pay cuts will in fact stop. If we have an independent Scotland, and the new party is elected to the Scottish Parliament, we have automatically won support. Not just for selfish reasons, it's not just about pay, it's about principle. Why should we continue to pay the reductions in our living standards for a crisis that we didn't create while the rich are still in the picture? And I think lots of women involved, yes, in an independence referendum, if you put that message out. What do you think about that?
I'll do my best to be briefer in these questions, Fiona, but there are still big questions, so I think that's your name. Ian, sorry. I have no doubt that an independent Scotland will be more democratic than the Westminster system it replaces. And I can give you lots of practical, specific reasons for that. We won't have our legislation partially made by an unelected chamber. I also agree with you that, for me, independence is not just about transferring powers from London to Edinburgh. If that's all it is, then it's better than having them in London, but it's not big enough. So we want to devolve powers from Edinburgh to local areas. We've recently done a lot of work about what additional powers we would want to devolve to island communities. I chair an organisation right now called the Cities Alliance. It was looking at how we empower cities more. So I absolutely agree with you that devolving of power to as close to people as possible is the right thing to do. Now, the freeze on the council tax, when we came into power, when the council tax had gone through the roof, the council tax in the 4 years before we were in office had increased by 60–70%. People were paying council tax bills that were higher than their mortgages and their rents. So we froze the council tax, not because of any issue of principle, but to help people who were really struggling to pay it. And I don't apologise for that, but I do think the general point about empowering local communities and empowering local authorities, and I would go even further than local authorities to community councils, is absolutely what we should be thinking about in that independence context. You mentioned land reform, and I suppose the assurance I can give you that nobody will be knocking on our doors, stopping us doing the things that we think are right, is that we're already doing a lot on land reform. Not this government, but one of the first acts the Scottish Parliament passed was the land reform legislation. Many people thought that didn't go quite radical at its time. It was time to move further. So we've just had an expert group publish a very comprehensive report for us on what we should do now on land reform, which we're currently considering and thinking about. I don't know if you've seen that, but somebody's interested. So, there's an appetite there to move forward with land reform anyway, regardless of the upcoming referendum, and we'll see a lot from the Scottish Government over the next wee while about how we intend to take some of those things forward. But, democracy is not just about where your national parliament is. You're absolutely right about that. Democracy is how people live their lives. It's about how all of us have a chance to engage with, to influence, to shape the world that we live in. Final point on that is our proposals for a written constitution that actually enshrine the rights of the citizens, that enshrines the position of local government and local democracy. That's a massive opportunity to make sure that power in Scotland lies where we think it should lie and doesn't end up in the hands of just the few. So, will an independent Scotland be perfect? Will there never be things that anger you or frustrate you or you just think, of course that would be high in the sky? Will it be 1,000,000 times better? than the lack of democracy that you described in Westminster, absolutely. And I believe that actually regardless of who will be in government, because I think the way we do democracy, the way we do politics will be fundamentally different, and that has got to be a good thing. Elsie, your question about the NHS. I mean, you're right, the NHS, this is something I learned very quickly when I was Health Secretary. You'll always find it difficult to keep up with advances in the health service. You know, every day that passes just now, there's a new drug somewhere being developed, there's a new bit of equipment being invented. You know, and the drugs of today are much more sophisticated. You know, the pharmaceutical companies, the drugs they're developing these days, don't just come up with a drug to treat a cancer generally. They come up with drugs to treat your specific cancer as an individual, who, you know, attack the particular cells in your body, personalised medicine. So that's expensive, and we need to always be thinking about how we continue to fund the health service as well as we possibly can. Should people pay more? Well, I think before we start expecting people to pay more, we should start thinking about some of the things we're spending money on that aren't important, or that are not our priorities. It goes back, just as an example, to what I said about Trident. You know, why should we be asking you or taxpayers across the country to pay more while we still are chucking billions of pounds into nuclear weapons? Let's make sure we get the chance to prioritise. And there will be healthy debates in Scotland all the time, I'm sure, about tax rates and where taxes should be. You know, an independent Scotland, like any other country, taxes will be set, the Chancellor in the budget every year. George Osborne will tell you the tax rates will be in the UK in a year or 2 years' time. These are decisions that are taken based on circumstances at the time, what we think our priorities are. But let's start with making sure we're not wasting our resources on things we don't want, instead spending them on things that we do want and things that are important to us. Charlotte, your question is, I think it brings into pretty sharp focus. Where are you, Charlotte? Yeah. It brings into pretty sharp focus one of the key choices at the heart of this referendum. And I suppose how I would describe it is austerity versus prosperity, which is a kind of soundbite way of describing a more complicated argument. If we vote no, then we know that the next goodness knows how many years are going to deliver more of the austerity budgets that we've seen in the last few years. And that's austerity beyond what is needed for the economy. You know, without being too fine a point on it, the current Westminster government is ideological when it comes to cutting public spending. It's not solely because it's necessary in the judgment. They want to cut the size of the state and the amount of public money. So George Osborne, we know that Westminster will increase public spending by no more than 1% over the next few years. And if we're still part of that system, that will be what our budget is subjected to, and there will be inevitable consequences of that for us. We take a different view. We think the economy and our public finances can support and afford bigger increases in public spending over the next few years. We can increase public spending, we estimate, by about 3% without being irresponsible, still having sustainable public finances. And if we go down that track rather than down the austerity track, then yes, you get out of the position that you're having to get more off of the backs of public sector workers, well, expecting them to have their pay freeze for every day. You are able to start rewarding public sector workers more fairly than has been the case recently. And you know, within the constraint we operate in as a Scottish Government, we've shown that that is our instinct. So for public sector workers, as an open compulsory redundancy commitment here that there isn't in England, we've tried to put more focus on the lowest paid. Everybody in our public sector, or the public sector we are responsible for, which includes the health service, gets paid a living wage. So we agreed to implement in full the health service pay review body recommendations. In England, that's not happening. So we've tried to keep faith with public sector workers, but we know it's difficult, and we do want to move out of pay freezes. But we'll only be able to do that if we move out of the austerity straitjacket that we're in at the moment, and I hope that's a message that public sector workers and length and breadth of the country can hear very, very clearly. One other thing which doesn't affect the public sector, because public sector workers generally get paid the living wage, is if we're independent, we decide what the level of the minimum wage is. The minimum wage, what the poorest people in our society get paid, hasn't kept pace with the rate of inflation over the past 4 years. If it had, the lowest paid in our society would be something like £600 a year better off. So we can guarantee that at least every year the minimum wage rises in line with the cost of living. We're actually considering a recommendation from a group that we asked to look at welfare policy for us that says what we should actually be doing, and I think there's a lot of common sense in this, we should over time be moving the minimum wage to the level of the living wage. So that you've got two separate wage levels, you've got everybody paid statutory living wage, and that's something I would like to see an independent Scotland achieve. Maybe not overnight, but certainly over a reasonable period of time.
The cards are on your chairs. If you've still got a question, please write it on and put it in the box, and I will make sure that either I or Nicola gets the answer to your question. Okay, bye. First three hands up. There's another. There's another. Right? Thank you. Anything else, please write them on your card. Most of you know that used to be a librarian. I will not. I will make sure that your question gets answered, that the information gets answered.
My name is Margaret. I just wondered what would happen in Scotland about control of interest rates, because as someone who's semi-retired now and paid 12% mortgage rates when I was younger and have savings now, I've worked hard for all my life. They're not getting, basically, anyone who's got savings who should retire has lost income. And I just wonder if you're looking for everyone to be better off, what you're going to do about older people who don't necessarily want to rely on state pension, but just find themselves. Also, of course, interest rates affect mortgages, people who are younger, and we don't want them to have to pay too much either. So I just wondered what we could control that. The other thing I wanted to mention was what work I do is the Employment Tribunal Service. Now that's not at all. We're thinking about the Ministry of Justice. I don't know if people here know that if you have problems in the workplace, you have to have a longer service now, and judges sitting alone don't sit with members like myself, HR and trade union, and it costs you £1,200 now, whereas before if you had a problem at work you could go and represent yourself. Is the Scottish Government in the future going to do anything about that, because people are being thrown out of jobs, treated unfairly, bullying, discrimination, and they've got nowhere to go unless they can afford £1,200 and then they take a big risk.
Nicola, my name is Alan. I'm not SNP, I've never voted SNP. I'm Labour supporter, but I will be voting yes in the referendum. It seems to me that the yes campaign is a good majority for them over the Prince in September. So what would your message be to those undecided voters who might think that the yes vote is in fact good for this?
understand £650 for 5 years. The next day, he decided that it can be inflation, a building finance to Bearsden, and it's Scottish government is smashed. How can you combat this inflation?
I have to say, I've seen my person around and believe me, I had that during the war for around 5 months today, and that's what it is. It's what we're to do, nice to people, and try to get very much basic amount of work from things through the level purposes, evaluating the problem, do you think that there's a very good possibility that people would know Scotland and things like that reaction where you see as well? There's a very good possibility that as the point that when I'm majority you get to very well and it's more like you think Scotland is like does not really
before they have minutes in my life. Right, deep breath. Margaret. On first employment tribunal, yeah, we disagree with many of the changes you talked about. They are denying people access to justice, and if they lose their jobs in unfair and unjustified circumstances, and if we're independent, the powers that govern employment tribunals would pass to Scotland, and we have the ability to change these things, and we would reverse many of the changes that we've seen in recent times, so that there is proper, fair access to that kind of justice. It's very important for people in those positions, so I would agree with you on that. On your point about interest rates, I spoke earlier on about currency and about being in a currency union. If we're in a currency union, our monetary policy, as opposed to our fiscal policy, which we have complete control over, is monetary policy, as you know, is interest rates, etc. Interest rates will be set in the same way they are now, which is by the Bank of England, independently of government. The Bank of England sets interest rates completely independently. I think it's likely the Bank of England have indicated we're going to see some rises in interest rates over the next wee while. You hear again people on the other side saying, oh, interest rates will be higher in independent Scotland. Well, I can point you to lots of countries similar in size to Scotland where interest rates are actually lower than they are here, but that's not the point I'm going to make. If we're in a monetary union, they are set consistently. For financial institutions who compete for business, the idea that they'd have higher interest rates in Scotland and lose business or get somebody undercut them, that's not, we'll have a consistent interest rate. Interest rates will always lead to tensions between the saver and the borrower. So the borrower wants low interest rates, and that's important, particularly for young people trying to go on to the housing market or people trying to pay mortgages. The saver wants interest rates to go up. The bank has to take a balanced view of interest rates in terms of the economy as a whole. But as part of our currency union, that's how interest rates will continue to be set. Alan, where's Alan? I don't know if you were in earlier on when I sort of partially addressed this point. You're absolutely right. How Labour supporters will have a big impact on the outcome of the referendum. I would say two things to Labour supporters. If you want a more socially just Scotland, then I can't see a better way of getting it than vote yes. Sure, we can cross our fingers and hope that Ed Miliband A wins the next general election, and B, implement policies that are actually much different to the policies that David Cameron is implementing. And there's not too many signs, particularly around welfare, etc., that he would do that. So we can cross our fingers and hope for all that, or we can decide we're going to be the ones that determine the policies that influence how socially just we are, and I think we should definitely take that course. The second thing I would say is what I said earlier on. Independence for Scotland is the best thing that will ever happen to the Scottish Labour Party. Because suddenly the Scottish Labour Party is itself independent. And instead of having its policy directed and influenced by what's happening in Westminster, which in turn is influenced by how they win votes in Middle England, the Scottish Labour Party can be just that. They can be true to their own values, their own principles, their own priorities. And that, as I said earlier on, that might not be good for the SNP, that might be more competition, but fine, that's good, that's democracy. So, if for no other reason, vote yes to get your own party back. I think that's a pretty good reason. Nuclear, sorry, who asked about nuclear? You said I didn't catch your name. Chris. Yes, we'll sign the treaty, and we'll be very proud and eager to do it. This is public. I'm sure somebody's recording me. I think we already have, to be perfectly honest. Right, okay, well, I'll check that, but, there is, I reckon there's probably not a lot we can do to be clearer about our anti-nuclear credentials than we already have. And let me say this, I stood in George Square, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, maybe slightly longer than that, in front of a CND rally audience, and I said what I'm about to say to you now, we will not use Trident as a bargaining chip, because getting rid of Trident is a matter of principle. Sorry? Come on. Well, you can go through your life being deeply cynical about people who agree with you, or you can accept that, I was a member of CND before I was a member of the SNP. The anti-nuclear stuff runs through me like a sticker up. I would not countenance using Trident as a bargaining chip. We could rid of Trident as quickly as it's safe to do. We've got a time scale on that in the white paper. We want that to happen within the first term of an independent Scottish Parliament. It has to be safe, it has to be done properly, because Trident is a pretty dangerous, horrible piece of kit. So it's got to be done safely. But we'll get rid of it, because that's what it said, and it's a matter of principle. And actually just to keep the faith with that, you won't be sitting here, if we vote yes and we're in government, you won't be sitting here in a few years' time saying, you said that and you didn't do it. I can assure you that. And I don't know how we can make that clearer for you. There comes a point where you just have to be prepared to have a bit of faith. Just because Labour broke all the promises doesn't mean we're always saying I know your question wasn't specifically about the £500 million, but just let me say a word about that. £500 million over 20 years is what David Cameron announced last week. And the only bit of it that's guaranteed actually is the first 5 years. And that's £15 million a year for 5 years. Now, I don't turn my nose up at any money for Glasgow. I'm a Glasgow politician and money spent in Glasgow, so we were like, yeah, we'll match that. It's hardly difficult given that it's such a paltry sum of money. But let me put that in context for you. In 2 weeks' time, the Scottish Government will spend almost that amount of money on the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. I can cite you just 4 projects in Glasgow that are funded by the Scottish Government right now, out of many, but just 4. Commonwealth Games, the new Southern General Hospital, which is the biggest hospital in the UK, the modernisation of the Glasgow subway, and the new fast-link dedicated bus route that will run along the north and south banks of the Clyde. Those 4 projects alone, which have been funded right now, over and above the capital money we give to Glasgow every year, are worth £1.5 billion. If David Cameron thinks he can buy the votes of people in Glasgow, I think he's going to have to come up with a lot more money. and how to get a message across. I was doing another meeting with Fiona earlier on today, and this question came up. I'm a politician, I know the media as much as anybody does. You know, my husband would tell you I work with the media every morning when I turn the radio on. And do we get a fair share of the media? No, we don't. I've been a member of a party for all the time I've been in it that hasn't had a fair shot at the media. And used to be said the SNP will never win an election because the media is against us. No, we did. And then we won another one. I made a decision quite early on in this campaign. And I would, those of you here, those lots are not committed yes supporters, but those of you who are, I would encourage you to make the same decision. The decision I made was this: I've got a finite amount of energy, and I've got a choice of how I spend that energy. And I can spend some of it ranting with the media, or I can spend all of it getting out there and trying to get over the media and under the media, around the media, by talking directly to people like you, and that's the choice I've made. So I wish I could wave a magic wand and get a better media, but that's probably not going to happen. So I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure I get the message across directly to as many people as possible. I wouldn't share or endorse your analogy with Nicola Sturgeon. I think we've all got to be careful about our language in politics, but I do think you're right to say that UKIP presents a big threat if you're still part of the Westminster system. I, like you, wanted to see UKIP not get a seat in Scotland at the European elections, and unfortunately they did. But there was a gulf between UKIP's performance in Scotland and their performance in England. I mean, they were the last party to get a seat here. They came fourth, I think. They got 10% of the vote. In England, they topped the poll. They got 13% of the vote. So, big difference. If we remain part of the Westminster system, again, I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen. I can't, forecast the future with certainty in this way. But equally, I can't stand here and tell you that it's guaranteed that after the next UK general election, the UKIP will not be government coalition with Tories. I think there's every possibility that could be a scenario. Equally, I think there's every possibility that pressured by UKIP and by the Eurosceptic wing of the Tory party, that momentum building in England to leave the European Union will become unstoppable. I mean, David Cameron is playing fire around all of this stuff, trying to placate the Eurosceptic wing by offering the referendum, and he should realise the more they push him, the further they want to push him on this kind of stuff. So the big danger is that we can end up being governed, even in part, by the kind of politics Nicola Sturgeon represents, and we can find ourselves taken out of Europe against our will. We can stop any of that, having any prospect of happening, by voting yes, and that is what I'm asking you to do.
I know that we all want to thank Nicola, but I especially want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I want to remark on the fact that I think half the audience are women. I want to remark on the fact that I think about 10% of the audience are under 30. So I think Westerton there's been quite a lot of media in here tonight that you may not have noticed. BBC's World Service. A national newspaper and a local tabloid. I am glad that Westerton has made it clear that we are totally engaged in this, that women are engaged in this, and that young people are engaged in this, and that on the 18th of September, with my heart, and I'm sure you're going to vote yes, that we will be doing it because we've used our heads as well as our hearts. So thank you.